hello everybody. We're just going to start, so if you want to grab the final seats. Okay, you ready? Hi. Hello everybody. Thank you for coming this evening on this very sort of wet and cold London evening. This is a talk that accompanies the exhibition in the gallery. If you haven't seen it, we'll keep it open so you can see it after the talk. It's a show celebrating the work of Walter Seagull, but in particular his self-build projects. And we'll be finding out more about them from curator Alice Grahame and the other people around the table. And we'll also be thinking about the future of self-build housing. The show is a year in the making, and it's been a collective effort from everybody, which really seems in keeping with the spirit of self-build. It seems also fitting that we've got the talk this evening. It's a day where the government's controversial housing and planning bill has gone to its second reading at the House of Lords. It's been suggested that this bill marks the end of social housing, with the government promoting home ownership at the expense of other affordable rented housing. So good timing, I think, to be talking about these issues. I'm going to introduce you to our esteemed panel. I'm going to start with Alice Grahame, who came to see me over a year ago to talk about the potential of doing a show on Walter Seagull here. And it's a fitting home, as Alice pointed out, because Walter actually lectured here at the AA, and there's some really nice letters from the AA to him in the gallery. Alice is a freelance journalist. She wrote for The Guardian on sustainable business and housing. She was a BBC journalist who worked in the newsroom for 12 years, so she should be feeling quite chilled about this evening. She's a freelance writer now and focuses on feature writing. She's also, importantly, a resident of Walter's Way. So she has a unique perspective, I think, maybe this evening. Jon Broome, sitting next to her, also incredibly instrumental in getting this show together. Without his advice, our own Lee Regan wouldn't have been able to build the one-to-one in the gallery, so massive thanks to Jon. Jon actually started working with Walter Seagull on social housing, self-build groups in the 80s. He was a director of Archetype in the 90s, working largely in the public sector, specializing on low-energy design, timber frame construction, participatory design, and sustainable building. He's the co-author of a few books on self-build housing and author of the Green Self-Build book. Jon Broome Architects is now working on sustainable neighborhood with Russ, who we're going to come to in a minute. Charlie Luxton, next to Jon, he is an architectural designer and a television presenter who writes and speaks about the environment and sustainable architecture. His award-winning practice creates sustainable living projects, and he has supported several eco-friendly projects in his area, including, Wikipedia tells me, a carpool, solar panels onto the roof of a local school, and green furbishing 30 houses, but he'll tell you a lot more about his projects shortly. Schulz, who is a member of the 18-strong collective Assemble, who I'm sure you're all familiar with now because of the sort of hoo-ha they caused by audaciously winning an art prize. It threw everyone into great confusion about what was art and what is architecture. They are actually rebuilding the first Seagull timber frame project in the house in the garden, as it became known, in Highgate. Assemble seek to actively involve the public as both participant and collaborator in the ongoing realization of their work. And Louis can tell you more about that project in a minute. Kareem Dayes, finally, last but not least, is a musician whose parents built their own home in Walter's Way back in the 80s, and there's some great pictures of him and his family actually sort of sawing bits of wood and building a roof. Kareem, I think, well, you got two brothers, so maybe it wasn't you in the picture.
I think I was born then. So.
Kareem wasn't born then, but his little brothers look like they're participating. He's actually part of RUS, which is the Rural Urban Synthesis Society, and it's a volunteer-led community land trust based in South London, which Lewisham Council has amazingly given land to be used for the borough's first self-build project since Walter's Way, which brilliantly brings us sort of, well, not full circle, because it's going to be the future, it'll carry on, but brings us nicely to maybe where we should begin this speak this evening. I just want to point out, actually, that this panel is so esteemed that with their knowledge and passion for Seagull, we could start our own collective tonight, build a community of sustainable housing, write about it, make a television documentary, and win a major art prize. So I'm going to hand you over to Alice, who's going to start the talk this evening. Thank you.
Oh, good evening. I've got 5 minutes to tell you about Walter Seagull and how I became involved in this project. These pictures that you can see on the screen were taken by James Drew Turner when he came to photograph for a Guardian feature. So I'm just going to be slowly going through them. I hope you enjoy the photos. So Walter Seagull was born in 1907. He was born in Berlin. His father was a fairly well-known painter called Arthur Seagull. He spent a lot of his childhood in Switzerland, where he went with his family in Ascona, in Italian-speaking Switzerland, where there were lots of artists, and it seems like he led quite a sort of a free sort of childhood in meeting with lots of artists and intellectuals. He trained as an architect in Berlin. His first commissioned building was in Switzerland. It was in Ascona, and it was a summer house for his father's patron. He spent some of his early career as an architect in Mallorca, where he studied indigenous Balearic architecture and built a couple of villas. He was also very interested in Egyptology and was quite an expert, and had a job in Cairo at the Museum of Archaeology. He was a tomb surveyor, and his special subject was ancient Egyptian chairs and thrones, and he wrote some papers about it, published papers on it. It was actually because of the Egyptology that he actually came to England. He was offered the chance in the 1930s to come and work at the British Museum to continue his work on Egyptology. And after having arrived in England, he met up with someone he'd known before who became his wife, who was a student studying architecture at the AA. Seagull then wanted to revive his career as an architect, so he taught at the AA. He got commissioned to build some apartment blocks in Kensington, some factories, some houses. One of the developments he produced was St Anne's Close in Highgate, where he lived with his family, and other architects lived there in a semicircular community. After the death of his first wife, Eva, he married his second wife, who already had a big Edwardian house in Highgate, and she already had 4 children. They decided to demolish this big house in Highgate and rebuild it in a modernist style, which they did. While they were doing that project, Walter Seagull had built for his family to live in a small wooden timber-framed hut with panels, which he built for just £800, and it just took a couple of weeks to put up. And it was known as the Little House in the Garden. And that actually became the prototype for the later self-built houses. Because he worked from home, he mostly worked independently. He had clients coming to his home. When they came to his house in Highgate, they were very interested to see this house in the garden, and he ended up getting more people wanting to actually have one of these little houses themselves. It seemed to generate more interest than the actual modernist brick house, which he'd also built. He started producing some of these small houses, and then when one of his clients fell out with their builder and decided to finish the project themselves, he realised that these houses could actually be built by people who didn't have building experience, and that's how the idea of self-build was born. In the 1970s, there was a big housing crisis in Lewisham, and the council had a lot of people on the waiting list that they wanted to house. So they were thinking about some innovations to try and make this happen. The council was willing to entertain some quite radical ideas. There was Brian Richardson was the assistant borough architect. Nicholas Taylor was in the housing department, and Jon Broome also worked in the architecture department for Lewisham. I believe, John, you knew Walter from his time at the AA, and these guys got together and started to discuss the possibility of a self-build housing scheme in Lewisham. It took several years of discussions, but eventually a piece of land, some little pockets of land that were considered too small for conventional development. They were also quite hilly, prone to subsidence, was set aside for this project. The first phase of the project began in the late 70s. The project was advertised in the council's newspaper. People who were said to be in housing need, so people who didn't own a home, were allowed to apply, and the self-builders were chosen by a lottery. Walter Seagull believed that anyone could build a house as long as you could saw in a straight line or drill a straight hole. He thought that you would be able to build a house, and so no experience of building was needed. After the first project, a second project was started in the mid-80s. The first phase became known as Seagull Close. The second was Walter's Way. Walter died in 1985 before the second phase was finished. It's said that Walter Seagull is the only British architect who have had two London streets named after him, Seagull Close and Walter's Way. If anyone knows of any different, then please let us know, but we like to think that that's the case.
The only living architect.
While still alive, although I think he may have died by the time Walter's Way was named. But
What are we doing?
So, last year, because of it was 30 years since Walter died, so myself and some other Seagull residents, I'm lucky enough to live in one of Seagull's houses in Walter's Way. We were discussing different ways to just note or mark the fact that it was an anniversary. We regularly have big open house events, and in 2015, because of the 30 years, we had a special, even bigger open house event with more houses open, and we had speakers, and there seemed to be so much interest that we thought there was that the subject warranted more attention, and that an exhibition would be a good way of telling a wider audience about Walter Seagull. So I had a chat with Vanessa, who runs the gallery here, and the AA did seem quite keen on the idea. So a year later, we have the exhibition. If you haven't had a chance to see it, I do recommend you go and have a look, because the AA team have done a beautiful job of presenting Seagull's work in the gallery next door.
Okay, so the back of Walter's head, and taking over where Alice has left off. As soon as these houses were built, of course, everybody started changing them, adding on to them. And so, you know, this is Ken Atkins, who's the chair of the first self-build group, who over a weekend was able to buy 6 panels, get his mate round, 1,500 quid, and he'd extended onto the veranda, and so, you know, the windows were repositioned and he got an extension. And so it's picking up really where the Lewisham scheme's finished, and taking us up to what's going on now in Lewisham with Kareem, who will explain more about that. I mean, what immediately happened, of course, after Walter's Way was finished, was that the ability to fund this kind of thing through council house building money disappeared when Thatcher was elected, and so it all came to a stop. We thought there was definite future for this, but no money, and so it took some years to persuade the housing association movement that there was something in this, and meanwhile we started developing the ideas by looking at the whole question about energy. I mean, Walter's approach was put on more jumpers, and it's a different view of kind of comfort and economy, really. And that went then on to the energy that was going into the building itself. I mean, it's timber. It's essentially a very low carbon approach, and then looking at the finishes and so on, and potential risk to health. So a whole look at the whole sustainability of building and how that applied to what Walter had been doing. And you'll see applied to a number of different types of buildings. So this is a community centre in King's Cross. Previously there was a classroom in South London. Looking at improving the structure as well, making it lighter and easier to build. And exploring the potential economy of the whole idea. I mean, this was a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house which a guy built in Basildon for 30 grand, which it was a few years ago now, but it was astonishingly good value even then. More people should know about this, it seems to me. But eventually we did get to start building properly affordable houses for self-builders. So these were co-ops for rent. These were 3 in Brighton. Some of you might have seen the Grand Designs revisited recently. And it was also one of the largest that we did, which was 24 houses in Brighton as well. But they were all over South London, these schemes, about 200 houses in all, we reckon. Exploring the sort of training potential as well. So people were saying things, if I've built a house, nobody will ever be able to tell me I can't do anything ever again. I mean, it's that kind of level of self-confidence which I think is what makes it really rewarding from my point of view. So this was a scheme in Peckham for unemployed, homeless young people who went on and built houses for themselves. And we put up a house for ourselves in Forest Hill, and that explored the whole question. It's poles, it's tree trunks, but it's also kind of texture and colour and volume and space and so on. So it was exploring some of the architectural sort of aspects of what you could do with this approach, and adapting it to build passive house, very low energy buildings, and applying that in the conventional housing association sector. So you'll see here on the bottom corner there, the foundation arrangement, 6 steel screw piles supporting each house. So again, taking Walter's very economical, back to basics approach and seeing how one can apply it in the mainstream. And finally, finishing up, this was kind of the inspiration, the work we are doing currently with Russ in Lewisham. A 2-bedroom, a modest 2-bedroom house for £45,000. Again, this is current kind of technology. It's a passive house. It's very low energy building. Again, more people should know about this. And so with that, I'll pass you over to Charlie.
Hello. I had 2 things I wanted to talk about, and I sort of flipped a coin. And I was going to talk about the political agenda of self-build, but I'm really hoping that we're going to do that in the group discussion afterwards, because that is actually the big thing, that Walter's legacy, I think, is there. But the coin decided that I would talk about a small project, a Son of Seagull, which is a sort of a kind of a rebooted version, I think, that we've tried to work on, of using the kind of logic behind Seagull to build a small house in Cornwall. That is the site. It's not finished, so I don't have lots of pretty pictures yet. I have sort of ongoing site pictures, but it's really being considered about a very simple plan, 2 bedrooms, an outdoor area, and it's all about working with, it's stretched. Lots of small span roofs, so they're liftable size timbers, and again using very simple shapes, working with the local kind of vernacular, and using these things, which John showed in his chat, which are timber I-beams, which I think Walter would go nuts for if he were alive today, because they are made of small lumps of timber, so they can be almost sort of waste timber from the timber mills. They are glued together, and they are very light, very strong, and very straight. And the idea of Walter's of going down the buildings, merchers, and buying your timber and nailing it together is brilliant until you get it home and the thing is like spaghetti and it's all over the shop and rubbish. And you spend so much time trying to straighten it all up, it's a nightmare. This stuff is really light and really straight, and it's so basically fantastic to build with. And also, because it has these two outer timbers and this very thin connecting sort of particle board, very low thermal bridging. And given the fact that you want to get super low U values and very low energy consumption, massive thick walls is brilliant. So this stuff is fantastic. And you can do a lot with it. And so we have designed this building that is actually just a whole series of purlings. And then you have a sheathing board on the inside, which is actually 9mm OSB. I'm getting quite nerdy. And I will shut up if I get too nerdy, do tell me. And then on the outside, it's a highly breathable particle board. And the great thing is that these are very liftable one-man sheets. So you can put it all up, and then you blow it with a wood fiber insulation. So wrap it in some membranes, wrap it in some timber, and that's your house. So you're going wood, a bit of membrane, wood, plaster or wood, and that is fantastic because you're locking in all that CO2 and the embodied energy into the building. So hopefully you're locking, someone told me it's 1.2 tons of CO2 per ton of wood fiber, which I couldn't work out, and I questioned, but he seemed smarter than me, so I took his word for it, but I don't know if that's true. But what you're basically doing is locking a lot of CO2 out of the atmosphere into your building for the period of the building. So that's fantastic. So rather than being a CO2 producing exercise, you can start to really offset that. So what we did in order to get this built, we used a gardener. That's a good idea, because he wasn't the cheapest gardener, but he's very good. He does know how to build a little bit, but he's never built a house, and he's never built in timber, ever. So we designed this set of plans. So you lay your floor plans down, they come numbered, because what you can do with this stuff is you can order it pre-cut. So we created a sort of a BIM, a computer 3D model, and then we could get every single size of every single timber and order it pre-cut, delivered to site numbered. So we created this kit. So you lay your floor plates down once you've got your foundation, and then you go around marking it all up with all the numbers. You then put up every single timber has a number, on it goes, in go your lintels, on goes your roof, and then there's a bit of sort of fiddling around where we got a bit carried away, and it wasn't as cheap as it should have been because we got a bit carried away. But the principle is there of how you can detail all of these lintels, and it really is simple. So this is, after the floor plates went down, that's within an hour, that's within 4 hours, that's on day 2, that's Lee, and that's the roof going on, and then we sort of boarded it out, blow in the wood fibre insulation, which is a huge amount, and then we sort of wrapped it in local stone because of the local planning, and then this is oak cladding. This is actually sort of waste wood. It was all different widths and different depths, and we got it really cheaply, about £16 a square metre, and just sort of used that as a rain screen. And it makes these lovely little shapes inside, and you can see on the left, that's sort of where it is now. And it's actually been very affordable. I think it's kind of come in at about, taking out even with the labour, it's about 850 a square metre, and it's triple glazed MVHR, sort of nearly sort of getting towards passive house. It can't be passive house because it's a rubbish shape. That's the problem, but we needed that for all the solar panels. So, I mean, really, I got in touch, and then we're doing another building with it, because we liked it so much, we persuaded another client. So this is another building, and this is going to be 60 grand, I think, and it's the same principle. I don't know why I'm showing you two, but I think what I was trying to say is it's quite an interesting process that, you can apply to lots of different building shapes. And I think Walter Seagull would like it, because you kind of iron out all of the issues on the computer, and then it does become really very simple. And this is really what it's for, is that you get this complete cut list and a complete list of all the materials that you need, so that there's no wastage. So, that's absolutely crucial. And I learned all about this from visiting Jon's house about 11, 12 years ago, doing a program about trying to get on the housing ladder as a young person in London, and realised I thought there'd be lots of sneaky kind of ideas of building on roofs and back gardens, and there just really aren't. And the only thing that there is, I think, is community self-build, collective self-build is the only option for young people in housing, and the way to solve housing in this country. And that is a huge political agenda, which hopefully we'll talk about in the open discussion.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Louis from Assemble. So I thought I'd start by just saying a little bit of context about how Assemble started. And this isn't actually our first project, it's our second project called Folly for a Flyover. And it was a kind of event space under a forgotten motorway undercroft next to a canal in Hackney Wick in 2011. And I suppose we started just as a group of friends, wanted to do a kind of some fun projects, and we first started by doing the cinema in a petrol station, and then we did the Folly the next year. And I suppose we didn't really think about it that much, but we did build it ourselves, not for some kind of political or social reasons, but just because it was the kind of only option in front of our faces. You know, we did have the odd professional in, that the scaffolding wasn't all done by us, but that was something that kind of it just happened that way. And this is the kind of the finished building, which I suppose was made to look. It was made of wooden bricks from reclaimed timber, and was kind of. It was on the Olympic Park side of the canal. I don't know how well you know the area, but on one side's the Olympic Park, and on the other side is kind of old Hackney Wick, with this kind of language of brick gable ends and that sort of thing. And we kind of, although we were on the Olympic Park side, we kind of wanted to align ourselves with the old Hackney Wick side. So I suppose for me and for us, thinking about Walter Seagull, the interesting thing I think about the little house in the garden and the self-build projects that Jon was involved with is that they kind of blur the distinction between roles, between expert and layperson, between architect and client and builder and developer and user. And I suppose many of our projects have done this too. And I guess for a long time we didn't really realize that we were kind of aligned with that. And it's I guess a focus on the project itself rather than a thought about fulfilling a certain role. So when I was a kid, I had this book called Maths Curse. I don't know if any of you have read it, but it's about a kid who gets cursed by his maths teacher to think of everything as a maths problem. So he's sort of walking around in his day-to-day life, and he looks at a building and thinks, oh, how many bricks are in this building? It's 1,000 times 100, and how big is it? How many square meters or whatever? He's thinking of everything as a maths problem, and I think in certain parts of life, that kind of analogy is very powerful. So, thinking of everything as an architecture problem, I think, is quite easy. Thinking that architecture will be a solution to a problem when maybe it isn't. So I suppose that's how we try and think, is to step outside those kind of roles and to think about the project itself, or what is the goal, what is it that we want to achieve. This is just a nice photo of our studio in Stratford, kind of some storage for all of our tools and things. But here we have a wood workshop and a kind of flexible space where we build big things. And this is a carpenter who works there as well. And this project is we kind of persuaded our landlord to kind of let us have this piece of land next to our studio for a few years. And then we got a little bit of money together to build something on it, we decided to build some studios because it's in Stratford, it's a good location for it. It makes sense, it was right next to our studio anyway. And I guess in this we acted as architect, but we acted as builder as well. We acted as developer, and in many ways, the most important part of it was the business plan, and making sure that we were offering affordable rent while at the same time being able to build it cheaply enough, and also making something that people actually wanted, and making a website to market it. Anyway, this is a photo that we took because we'd always loved the images of Amish barn raisings, where they would put up the timber frame and then kind of get the whole town of hundreds of people sometimes to sort of balance themselves on it. So I kind of took everybody up on the scissor lift and balanced everyone on top of the building for this one. There we go. And this is us putting some decorative tiles on the front, because the whole building was really just built for low cost, because it was only going to be there for 2 years. So we built it out of timber, which was really cheap, built it ourselves, which was cheap, and we clad it in this like industrial warehouse cladding material called Kingspan, which is really, really quick to put up and really cheap. And so we decided that the one thing that we would kind of allow is to have this one decorative element, which were these concrete tiles, which actually turned out to also be really cheap, because it's just kind of off-the-shelf cement dye. And we got a local artist to make them up, and we kind of instructed her to just sort of make small batches and make them in kind of random colours. And then we went up and put them up there kind of randomly. And this is it kind of in context. So the area is a development site, and it's all going to be lots of lovely houses soon. So another project that we did was in a similar vein, Black Horse Workshop, which is a kind of tool library, and we kind of took over a building in Waltham Forest with the help of the council to give people access to kind of large machinery and things and tools and lessons in how to use them. And that's that. And then I thought I'd just show this project we did in Southampton, just because it looks very similar to, in many ways, to the Walter Seagull kind of construction method. So this was just a theatre. It was a temporary theatre actually in a town square in Southampton that we built a couple of years ago, and I think one of the other builders is standing over there as well. And so I thought I'd just show that. But I think Walter Seagull really strikes a chord with us. I think even though maybe some people don't see us as this, but I think we kind of think of ourselves as sort of inheritors of this sort of Lloyd Kahn, like hippie counterculture, the sort of can-do spirit of the 60s and 70s. Which is just kind of about doing stuff yourself. And the project that Vanessa mentioned earlier that we're doing in Highgate, which is the kind of successor to the little house in the garden, so it's on the same site in Highgate. We're kind of at this sort of stage at the moment. Made this little model, and actually in many ways it's a really similar project to what Charlie's doing. It's kind of asking the question of how can we build something using the Segal self-build principles, but that's actually meets modern building regulations. So the kind of principles that we followed were to materials from the marketplace. So it's stuff that you could just buy from your local builder's merchant, build base or whatever. Just walk in and you should be able to go in there and buy everything you need. You should be able to build it with just basic joinery skills, like a couple of basic saws and a pair of hands. and everything you should be able to lift with 2 people, no kind of mental cranes or anything like that. And also, I suppose that really the kind of structure comes first. That we kind of envelop this kind of simple and economical and easy to build structure, rather than kind of thinking about what it's going to look like, or what kind of shape or form it should be beforehand. And actually, I think there's another picture of it there. This is the kind of structural model which is in the exhibition, actually. And sorry, I've probably taken too long, but just to say that this kind of, this, I suppose this, although this kind of thing, talking about housing in London, this isn't, I don't think, this is not the solution. But the idea of kind of breaking the cycle of, development tenders and kind of architecture and of developers and that kind of thing, and mixing up these roles is really important. And I think what Kareem and Jon Broome are doing with Russ very much is the kind of successor to that. And so I think, therefore, we'll move on to Kareem. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh dear, sorry. Slideshow. Yeah. Oh, and then flip really far. Will it go the other way? Oh, so play it safe. Okay, so while that's flicking through, I'll just do a quick intro. My name's Kareem. I'm the chair of Russ at the moment. I helped set it up back in 2009. I'm just going to briefly explain how we're connected to Walter Seagull, and then I'm going to talk about our current project, and then a little bit about the future. So this is just one of the pictures I found at home of. Well, I grew up in Walter's Way, so that's the connection. And my dad's one of the people in this picture. This is them erecting the frame. This is in Lewisham in probably 85, around that time. And another picture of it going up. And so I was lucky enough to grow up in Walter's Way, and for my whole life I kind of thought it was normal that people built their own house and lived on a beautiful street surrounded by trees and everyone was happy. It wasn't until I got into my later years that I realised that isn't normal. So I guess the questions began then. I was like, well, why isn't this normal? If we did it here, why can't everyone else do it? And okay, so this is kind of going forwards a bit. This is later on. So I wasn't around for it to go. I wasn't born. I was born in 87, just after it was finished. My mum was pregnant while she was on site, so maybe it even began there for me, who knows. And then I think my dad has extended twice. I mean, I think John touched on the fact that they're really adaptable. You can just kind of put up another frame, take out a few panels and extend really easy. My dad had 2 kids when they were building, and our family grew. We had 4 kids, so he had to extend twice. I think the floor space increased by 100% after the 2 extensions. So he basically changed the whole house. And then more recently, in 2007, we started renovating the whole house, because as John mentioned before, the Walter Seagull houses are not very well insulated and very expensive to heat. So my dad, my dad kind of instigated, he's over there, so we grab him after. We took out all the walls and all the floors and re-insulated the whole building, installed a ground source heat pump, and I don't even know what that's about, and then put on some photovoltaics. So we basically dug up the whole garden. And this is, again, directly from Walter Seagull. We didn't pay anyone to do it. My dad did it all himself and just got me and my brothers to chip in when we could. So I think it's a continuation of that philosophy. Like, I mean, it would have cost a lot more if we'd paid someone to come and do it. And we're just finishing the cladding, which is going to go up by the end of this month. So it's been a long haul, but he's basically brought the house up to a modern spec so that it's going to last another 100 years. So I think it's been well worth the investment. We got shafted by the new feed-in tariffs and the governments on photovoltaics, but I won't go into that. That's a different subject. This is a picture of Alice and Paul's house. I wanted to mention that as well, eco-renovation. So they've totally renovated the home as well. Did
did a similar thing with the walls and built this atrium to create a solar heat sink. And Paul, who's Alice's partner, was one of the founding members of Russ as well, was on our board for a few years and been a big inspiration for us. I think it's a really beautiful shot of their house. Okay, so yeah, this is an image to do with cradle to cradle. I mean, basically, I'm going to get into how Russ started. We were inspired by Walter Seagull, Walter's Way, you know, building your own house, it's affordable, empowering. And then I moved out, I went and lived in a housing co-op in New Cross Gate, Sanford Housing Co-op for 3 years, and the rent was 50 quid a week. Again, I was like, this is great. Why isn't more places like this? And, you know, and because I can't afford to buy, I'm going to be in the rental market forever, I reckon. And so he was basically trying to put the two together, this idea of this cooperative model and a self-build model, what can we do? And then I basically found out about community land trusts from a friend, Joseph, and did my research, looked at them, and I thought, that's great, let's start one. So we began in 2009, but we had, I guess the name is why I'm stopping on this frame. The name Rural Urban Synthesis Society is kind of inspired by the renovations and this cradle to cradle philosophy Paul put on his house. His idea, basically, we're taught, in fact, we're just told from all directions that humans are bad, and that we have this negative footprint on the planet, and we're bad news, you know, like Smith in the Matrix with a virus here to destroy everything. But it's like, I think it's patently obvious, anyone who's got any inkling design, science, materials, that needn't be the case, and that we can have a positive, a beneficial footprint. And that's really one of the key principles of Russ, is that whatever we do, whatever we build, we want to have a beneficial footprint long term. And I think it's totally plausible. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but that's our philosophy, and that's where the name comes from. Inspired by Cradle to Cradle, the Transition Hand Guide. I don't know if anyone's read that. Check that out. It started in Totnes. It's a movement about communities basically preparing for a post-fossil fuel age, basically, and being ready to deal with that. Heavily inspired by that book too. So moving on. So yeah, we set up in 2009. In 2012, we found a potential site in Lewisham. We thought it's sensible to start in Lewisham because they had this track record with Walter Seagull, Walter's Way. So we thought, well, they've done it before, maybe they'll go for it again. Fortunately, we had communication with Jon Broome. This site is actually around the corner from his mum's house, where his family grew up. He basically got on the phone and said, have you seen this site? You need to check it out. So we did. Wrote a letter to the mayor at Lewisham. We got a meeting, and we basically spent 3 years just meeting with them. And in parallel to all of that, even before the meetings, we'd set up our own community. We set up as Russ, and so we had a lot of public consultations. We had open days, workshops, inviting local people who live around this site and in the area to come and just talk about this idea of self-build, sustainable, affordable housing. And as you can imagine, lots of positive feedback, and this is something that people in Lewisham wanted. So we persevered. This is the site is empty after Lewisham cleared it. So basically what happened was, from our conversations with Lewisham, the council, it's a big bureaucratic beast. There's so many different people and different departments in it, and it's really hard to pin them down. But somewhere along the line, we triggered something in them. They didn't know what a community land trust was. They didn't really know what self-build was. The institutional memory isn't there because it's different people. So they didn't really know. So they basically went away and did their own research and looked into all of these things and we're in another housing crisis. They've got massive problems. So they were thinking, well, I guess the logic must have been somewhere along the line that this is a difficult site. It's been proven difficult with past things they've tried to do there. It's during this massive housing crisis, we thought, why don't we try something different to see if it can work? And I think they employed Our London, Lev Kerimol, to basically manage this. I don't know what you'd call it. It came down to a competitive tender. But the criteria for it was it had to be community-led, had to be self-built, and have a high level of sustainability. And I think that's down to 3 years, basically, of campaigning from us with the council and with local people, that was the criteria for the tender. And that went out spring last year, and then in October, I'm going to show you these pictures as well, actually. I kind of got ahead of myself. What I wanted to say today, actually, really make a big point of saying this, that from the beginning, from doing this, just being blessed with amazing support from amazing people like my dad, my mum, local people in Waters who have volunteered loads of time and hours to getting this dream up and running. And Jon Broome, as I said, was a friend. He did some sketches, and we used all of this in the meetings with Lewisham to show people that it fits, and like, the numbers were. I guess a lot of this was to do with the numbers, showing that it can add up. And so we were really fortunate to have basically an amazing team of amazing people to really help push this forwards, without which I don't think we have got to the point where we are now. So I just wanted to say thank you to all those people. So these are some of the drawings Jon did initially of like basically just essentially control schemes, what can fit on, dealing with the site. And then, so in October, it got announced that we won this tender and we are the preferred bidder. And hopefully February, it's going to be signed off, the development agreement. And we're at this minute looking to form the first self-build group for this development. And this last picture was done by Archetype, who are the architects working on this project with us, is Jon's old firm. And so, if anyone in here has lived or worked in Lewisham for 2 of the last 5 years, or has family in Lewisham, you'll be eligible to apply. And we're providing a cross mix of different houses. We've got social rent, affordable rent, shared ownership, and shared equity. So the idea is we want a mixed community of all different backgrounds. And if you're interested, go to our website, www.theruss.org, and you can download the application form and apply. I mean, the main criteria is this Lewisham connection. So I mean, if you're interested, go on our website. It kind of explains it in more detail. I'm not going to go into too much detail now. That's the post that we've just put out on Monday. So there's the website if you want to make a note quickly. And we're going to be holding 3 drop-in sessions over the next month. Deadline's 29th of February, and then we're going to have a public ballot of the eligible applicants for all the different units which are available, and hopefully we will be building sustainable, affordable, community-led development on the community land trust model, and it'll be affordable in perpetuity. And that's where we're at now. And that's it. Thank you.
To work, so I'm just going to shout. I wanted to ask a question, maybe of you all, but maybe I'll sort of slightly direct it at Charlie, because before we started the talk, you gave some quite terrifying statistics. When we talk about self-build, it sounds amazing. It's about empowerment, it's about community, and in fact, Jon Broome said something really nice on the Robert Elms radio show, that it's about kind of creating neighbourhoods, which is also something that gets forgotten in the bigger discussion about housing. I just wondered why there's this sort of fear, not just politically, but maybe sort of, a general fear as well of self-build. I mean, Charlie, you talked about sort of the sort of negative feeling, or the mistrust of new homes in general. I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about that.
This is the other side of the coin on the talk. But in this country, in England, we have self-build rates of about 5%. Okay, outside the UK as a whole, it's about 11%. A lot of that is Scotland. You think how small Scotland and Wales are. So they've actually got quite decent self-build rates. The next lowest country beyond the UK is Holland at over 20%. Okay, and then if you look at that graph globally, it just goes up and up and up and up. We are a freak of housing in this country, and that is because we have had a very long tradition of developers. We created them, with these London squares that are very beautiful. That we created developers really, and so the government has seen them as being the way to develop. Now, the statistics are that in the 1980s, the big house builders, the big 8 to 10 house builders, created about 40% of new housing in this country. That has now gone up to 60%. So fewer and fewer people are delivering all of the houses that we are building. And that is partly because that as a society, we've made an unconscious decision to be anti-development. And that's got a lot of history that we could go into. But as a result, the only people that can get access to these sites are the people who've got big enough war chests to smash through the back door and get the land association. So therefore, self-builders have fallen off the back of the train. And I think the second statistic, beyond the 5%, that I think kind of sums up a lot of this, the failure, is that in a survey, it was about 4 or 5 years ago, it was done by CABE, so it sort of ages it. I can't believe it's changed enormously in the time, is that 74% of people said they would not buy a new house. Right, now you think about clothing, cars, phones, everything else in society. It's all about new, and housing has got that stunning statistic. And what we are now doing with the new announcements from the government is we are just reinforcing that position, because who's going to deliver all the affordable housing? Well, yeah, the people that have failed to deliver the housing we want. So we're recreating, arguably, the banking banking situation of rewarding failure. So we have a massive problem, and unfortunately, I think we're sort of parking that problem for the next 5 to 10 years with the recent announcements, and it's pretty depressing, I have to say. That's the rant.
Did you find that, Kareem, when you were starting to get this project off the ground? Were people sort of mistrustful of the whole idea of self-build? What kind of comments did you get? Was it?
Yeah, I think there is a bit of that in terms of, is it going to be just some rubbishy little wooden shack? Is it going to take ages to build? There's a little bit of that. But I think where we are in Lewisham, it's because there is a bit of, people know about Walter's Way, that it's slightly different, and there is quite a positive memory, and people kind of connect in terms of, it's held as a big success. Like, we get people from all over the world coming down and trying to take pictures and get a little interview all the time. Like, it's held up as quite a successful project. So I think it was mixed. I think there is some skepticism, but there's also quite a thick vein of enthusiasm as well. Yeah.
It's funny that it's still seen as really anarchic, isn't it? I mean, Jon Seagull, who is sitting here this evening and who we couldn't have even started to do this show without his help and support, so massive thanks to Jon. But it seems to me be that sort of self-build has got this kind of anarchist tag. I mean, Jon, have you found that as being something that's sort of disabled progress in terms of getting self-build off the ground, that it's got this very sort of, it's associated with some kind of anarchist movement, which...
I think there is some cultural difference between conditions in the UK and elsewhere in Europe and elsewhere in the world. I mean, we are, I think, or could be characterised by a pretty individualistic approach to quite a lot of things, whereas, what Kareem has been talking about is the opposite of that, a collective approach. And, most of Northern Europe shares that kind of thing. And, politically and culturally, I think there is a big difference there. I mean, interestingly, Colin Ward was a well-known writer on environmental matters and anarchist, and great friend of Walter Seagull. There's a very good, strong, and healthy background in that area, I think. There is for all the sort of downsides of what Charlie was describing in terms of, an overwhelming mass housing, developer-led kind of activity, there has and still continues to be an undercurrent of individual effort. And grand designs, after all, has blossomed, out of that. The difficulty is it doesn't really address the whole problem around the access to land, which, is one of the principal barriers, I think, to people having more opportunities in this field. And unfortunately, whilst the government has embraced the idea of custom build, kind of making mass housing a bit more acceptable, I don't really think they're in the business of addressing the principal problems, which seem to lie in the sort of economics of the country as a whole, where you've got global banking allied with massive sort of development companies and so on, which makes it very difficult, as well as, cultural differences as well.
And there's something also that Louis touched on with Assemble's work, that kind of blurring of boundaries. We're in a school of architecture here. Is there kind of important lessons that, we can teach along the way of becoming an architect, but it's not, it's not a sort of ring-fenced profession, but maybe there's a way of kind of sharing knowledge that would be interesting. Louis, I guess that's a question for you. Do you, is there sort of better ways of all sort of working together that would blur the boundaries and just make more stuff possible?
Yeah, I think it's not just, I suppose, for architects to think about, but I think, Charlie's right. It's a culture which is very deep-seated, and people don't necessarily question it. But in other countries, it's really, really different. In Germany, 60% of new housing is self-built, and actually, just to clear up a bit of confusion, it's not exactly in the way that the kind of Segal self-built houses were. It means self-build as in they use professional builders, but they don't use professional developers. So people who kind of want to live in the houses, they're the ones who act as developers. And maybe they act as kind of general contractors as well, but they don't necessarily do kind of perform the physical act of building. And this is really normal, and kind of the local government responds well to it because it's normal, banks finance it, and it works. Whereas here, if you kind of went to a bank and said, we're a bunch of people and we kind of want to build a block of flats to live in, can we borrow some money? They would just say no.
Grahame, why was Lewisham different? I mean, they obviously have a history of self-build. Is it sort of, this is more a question to kind of fill me in.
Yeah.
Why they seem to be particularly open to self-build then?
I think it's a combination of our persistence and perseverance and the work we did, and yeah, I don't know. I just think things are chronic in Lewisham, and I don't know what the statistics are, but it's one of the worst. It's got a pretty bad situation. I think they've got bigger developments, and I really think they kind of just must have looked at this site and thought, well, it's one small site in the grand scheme of things. Let's just see how this can. And I think actually no, it's not. To be honest, I think that's undermining the good work we've done. I think they really scrutinised us, and we're like, could these people actually do this? And I think going back to that point about the fact we had such a great team, I think we were able to reassure them that we do have the credentials to do this. And yeah, it's one site of it's 33 homes. There's thousands and thousands of people in need of housing in Lewisham. So yeah.
I think that's the core of the issue there, that politicians just see thousands. And it's like what's one person building a house? Do you know what I mean? That's not going to solve my problem. I want Wimpy to do 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. But actually, still today, if you group self-build as a single element, they are the largest provider of new housing in this country. Yet until the Conservative government, surprisingly, very recently, put a new clause into local councils' need to understand and provide for affordable housing, rural housing, and now self-build housing. So they need to understand demand locally and then are minded to meet that in carrying out their duties. So there has been a political shift recently, which is exciting in self-build. But you go and speak to the local councils and they don't know what to do with it. All that it's done is opened a door for legal action to try and get self-built. But I think it's this issue of they just see thousands and what's one person going to do? But we know that kind of Chinese proverbs about whatever,
Yeah, there was
beach is just lots of grains of sand, that kind of thing.
There was a conference we went to at the House of Parliament, and the chairman of the National Self-Build Association, I've forgotten his name. John, do you know his name?
Ted, was it?
Ted, yeah, Ted Stevens, that's it. And that's one of the points he made. The massive challenge, the way he put it, was that we need to scale this. For this to be politically relevant on the level, which is what you're talking about, is we need to show that this works on scale and in terms of the bigger picture. So these are 33 homes, other groups are doing so many homes. I think in terms of making self-build, maybe we're not going to get to the German 60% anytime soon, but if we're going to move in that direction, it's showing that it can be scaled up is the major challenge, I think, in the long term.
Yeah. I guess at this point we should open it up to see if anyone's got any questions. My microphone it might be user error, but I can't make the microphone work. Is it working? No, I don't think it is. Has anyone got any questions? Maybe you have to be prepared to shout. Can you? Oh gosh, sorry. User error. Well, I
I've got two quick questions. One's on BIM and one's on density. I thought your pictures of BIM were really interesting, but I sort of think that's more custom built, and I wondered how, on where Seagull's method really seems to empower and upskill. My fear for BIM is that it's pessimistic about a de-skilled building industry. How do you, as an architect, introduce BIM into the conversation without disempowering, and how do you keep the end product adaptable? I really like the idea that this afternoon we're going to knock it out one side and add a room, and if it's kind of been locked into something that's quite brittle because it's BIM,
you might have to explain quickly for the non-architects what BIM is.
Well, it's not really BIM actually, but BIM is basically where you build your building virtually in a computer, and that can have as many characteristics as an actual building has, and then you can analyze it thermally and get complete quantities and structurally and basically test the building in a computer before you build it. What this is actually about is designing it so that you get pre-cut lengths, because what we found is that as soon as you start stopping to cut, you slow right down. And actually, labour costs and time, although you think I'm self-building, that doesn't have a cost, that has a cost because you're not working. And actually, that is still going to be the biggest component in your build. So if you can get the time on site reduced, and that's what it offers. And it's not about bimming and doing it, it's literally just getting a very comprehensive cut list to reduce waste. Because if you send it, and it's Travis Perkins who cut all of that stuff for us, they've got software to optimize the cutting and get it out of the lengths right. And if you sit down and try and do that, it's a complete nightmare. So yes, I understand what you're saying, but it's not really BIM. It's just about providing everything's cut so it can just go up on site.
But do you feel like when you hand the thing over to them, they could adapt it without you, or have you positioned a specialist into this, which in some way constricts perhaps the adaptability?
I think the reason that it's adaptable is that there's cells that you can knock through, and yes, the insulation will drop out, but you can stick some more in and then add it on. But the fact is, you built it, you know how it went together, so you know how to take it apart and how to repair it. And so I think, I think there has to be an acceptance that, to get planning, normally someone draws it, and, I think all we're trying to say is that using very simple, not BIM, but using very simple computer modelling, you can kind of bring that Seagull method up and actually use some of the good stuff about saving waste and speed to kind of turbocharge it.
I mean, the way I think about this is the question I always ask is who is in control of the process? Who's making the major decisions about what, where, how much it costs, all those kinds of things? What matters in my head is this idea of resident control and resident having, an overarching view about what's going on in the market, within which I think, and Walter certainly, he embraced computers at the end of his life in the context of, help in getting people to achieve what they were after. And and was interested, as you've said, in different technologies, steel, which you can glue together very easily in any shape you like, all sorts of things. All that's perfectly possible and reasonable, it seems to me. What matters is who makes those big decisions, in my mind.
So Walter originally did allow people to think about how they were going to use a building, didn't they? That was a very big part of it. How many, as Kareem said about your parents, you could extend. But from the beginning, it was possible, wasn't it, to sort of think about the needs of your family?
Oh, yeah. The idea was that, Walter would sit down with a family and work it out and get people to draw plans and all the rest of it. Yeah, for sure.
My father would actually, he talked to people about what they wanted. They would bring drawings and things. And then he would produce an exhaustive set of variants. And he would, there might be a dozen, whatever, and he would show them all, and they would then start to choose what they wanted. So.
Yes, which would kind of be unthinkable, wouldn't it, in a project today, or certainly that's maybe the problem with scaling it up as well. It's how you can build that flexibility and increase the numbers of affordable houses. How are you dealing with that, Kareem? Is there sort of flexibility? Well, I guess Jon and Kareem, how are you dealing with that idea of flexibility in a new project?
Well, I think the intention is to have a very adaptable framework within which many things are possible. And I mean, many of the examples which were referred to on the continent take that form. I mean, it's a framework within which you can fill it in different ways and change it in time. And the intention is, you know, to sit down with the individual households and figure out what people want, what they need.
I think it's going to be different to Walter's Way in terms of Walter's Way. There's quite a space in the detached houses. Ours is more working with potentially 2 or 3 blocks. So it's going to be different in that respect. But yeah, I think within the layout, you know, there's going to be a lot of room for adaptability, hopefully, yeah.
Has anyone got any other questions? Yeah, hi.
Hiya. So I was of the same opinion that you previously were, Charlie, that when I did enter the possibility of owning my own house, there'd be all these back alleys and nooks and crannies, and I could fight the system. I know you're saying that community trust is probably the most tenable of the lot, but could you just discuss, sort of, we just had that exhibition at the Building Society on 100 ways to solve the housing crisis. Could you discuss sort of like the field and say what other ones have been explored but just not viable? If that's it.
Wow, that's a big question.
What are your favourites?
Well, no, I mean, I think what's exciting. Okay, what is very exciting at the moment, I think, is what is going on in Cherwell in Oxfordshire, where they've taken on a big MOD site, Air Force site, and they are developing. I think it's 1,800 homes, self-built homes, isn't it? And so that is a massive, large scale. And what's amazing is it's Cherwell County Council have bought the site and are parcelling up the site and selling the site to individuals. And I think the thing to understand is that within the kind of developer process, and this is part of the problem with our houses and why they're pretty crap, our developer-led housing, is that in the continent they have about an expectation of about half the profit level that developers in this country do. So a lot of the value, obviously we've got very high land prices and we've got obviously high house prices, but then a whole chunk of that, like between 20 and 30%, once you add in all the marketing fees, just goes straight down the M1 to the city, to the pension funds, to the haves, you know. So all that money disappears. And so I think, this idea that you can get communities to self-build, I think there's 2 things. One, there's that money there that you can get hold of, an idea to get a cheaper house and or make a better house. But I also think there's an idea there, and this is what really excites me, is that there's an idea of sticky money. That in self-building, it's about that money being spent locally and brilliantly, inefficiently. This whole idea of efficiency is kind of a red herring. Because the only people that benefit from that really are the shareholders and the pension funds and all those people, generally. What you need is a little bit of inefficiency in building, generally, not in materials, but in labour, so that the local plumber and builder gets to build it. So that's where I think it's really exciting, because I think it has a bigger role to play in the economy, that, you know, self-build. And I think community self-build has that potential to sort of rehabilitate that relationship with house building. So I think that's why, because as you say, this idea of building on a roof in a garden, you know, it doesn't, they've sewn it all up. You know, I've been through everything, like a house on tracks that moves every 12 months because there's 28 days in a planning unit, but then they just redefine the planning unit. You know, it doesn't work. You know, they've got it sewn up. But it's the idea that, you know, you can get together and compete because you don't have to make that 20 to 30% go to the centre, means that that's where the option is. That's the chink in the armour that we need to be exploiting.
Yeah, sorry, over there. Sorry about the lack of microphone.
Okay, I'd just like to pick up the point about the relationship between the architects and the self-builders. I don't think that's been mentioned enough. What the effect of all that is on self-builders. I was on that scheme, on that scheme. And the group that built that, it changed every one of those people. But I think in terms of being students here, it's to look at the relationship that the architects had with the group. You know, that they have to train the group and the group trains the architects and they work together.
Yeah.
And it had a life-changing experience for everyone that did that. I think people get very bogged down in the architecture and the design of, you know, detailing around bolts and things like that, but actually about what it did to people and how people work with the architects and vice versa. And the architects have got to look at when they're doing that they've got to work out how to train the people to ask the right questions and a genuine working relationship, which means giving up some of the power. And a lot of self-built things go wrong because architects come along and say, I've got the
projects where people did evening classes.
Yeah.
So you were empowered to do every single part of the project. But it also kind of goes back to what you were saying, Louis, about blurring the boundaries. So maybe the thing that needs to also happen is a kind of relinquishing of power by the architect. That the idea that, Walter Seagull was obviously an incredible person and a brilliant architect, but allowed everybody to have this sense of involvement. So it's not, sharing it doesn't mean kind of losing. John, maybe you could say more about how Walter felt about sort of sharing.
I think what's arisen elsewhere is that there are roles which stand somewhere between a conventional architectural practice and a conventional building practice, and that, where there is more of this resident control, there are people who facilitate that process, and many of them are trained as architects originally. Some of them practice as architects as well, but they do the sort of we're involved with Kareem in Lewisham. We haven't designed anything yet, and we probably never will, but what we're trying to do is kind of facilitate designing a project in its widest sense. And so, that involves all the things that Jeff has mentioned about, relationships with the builders as individuals, and training and all those other things, and, financing it and getting it through the bureaucratic processes and all that kind of stuff. There is a different role there. And, a lot, I think, of the thinking going on in sort of self-built circles is about how you start to begin to define those alternative roles and how that all fits together.
Yes, sorry, here on the floor. Questions on the floor, very literally.
It's a question for Kareem, really. I'm just wondering, when you were doing your stuff in Lewisham, was there like a surfeit of sites? Did you see this is a site that you've used, and there's loads of other sites too? Because it strikes me that I'm not going to be able to do the model where I borrow loads of money from a bank to do the German model. So if I wanted to do one, it would have to be a community land trust. But are there actually enough sites across the boroughs in London that the council own and they don't want? And did you find there were lots of opportunities, or is it quite small?
It's a really good question, the issue of finding land. I'm not sure our example was the most useful in that we just went for the first one we heard about. So, and kind of got lucky. I've spoken to other groups. I think there's one up in Lancashire, and they spent 9 years and went through 21 different sites before they got going, just to give you an example. In London, I think it's even harder. So, yeah, I don't know. The issue of finding land is an interesting one. I think Lewisham is a borough that does have quite a few empty plots, and some of it's owned by the council, some of it isn't. I think it's really quite specific to where you are. And I don't think anything really beats going out and walking around and looking, getting on a bus. I used to know people who used to get on a bus on a double decker just so they could see above street level, and these were people who were squatting, so it's slightly different. But just looking, just looking for a site. It's like, I don't know. There's a group called London Citizens who've been really helpful for us. And they organise community walks. They just get people together from their local church, local schools, and this is all right. Let's all go out for a walk and let's just spot the sites together and make it a fun thing, and then write them all down. And then as a group, it's the kind of thing that being in a group is useful, because one person can make a list, another person can phone them up, and then you go to the land registry, pay the fee or whatever it is, and it's a task in itself, finding the site. And I think you can't really beat getting out there and walking around, really. Because we were John, his parents live right next to the site, so it's looking out the back window, and he probably thought, oh, what's going on with that, I think, yeah. Was that helpful?
I really think that people sort of in London really need to think about density and sprawl, because there's obviously this need for housing, and yet people don't want to go any higher and they don't want to go any wider. Occupancy rates are at their lowest level that they've ever been in this country. Like, this idea that there's all these empty houses, it's not true. Like, sure, there's luxury kind of houses in West London or whatever, mansions, but like the vast majority of housing is occupied. And that's, I think, shown by what Kareem's saying, like finding land is so hard to build anything on, even if you are a developer or a local council or whatever. And so I don't know. I think going up and or going out, it's inevitable, because also the kind of the idea at the moment is basically demolish the warehouses, you know, demolish the kind of employment zones, demolish the industrial estates, and build flats, which is fine. But eventually, the industrial estates in London will just run out. There won't be any left. And there won't be any space left to build houses anymore. And I mean, I don't know what people are going to do when that happens.
Move to Birmingham.
No, I've got a really good idea. You say it's an art project. You build loads of flats. You get away with it then.
That's our style. Yeah.
I think, you know, that there is this thing that the government have changed the legislation. I got it wrong, so it's affordable housing. They need the councils need to establish the need for affordable housing, general housing need, and a desire for self-build. And they need to respond to that in the carrying out of their duties. I think that is the key. You need to form groups. You need to collect names, you need people to sign up to groups, and then you need to pressure the council. Because no one quite knows how they're supposed to do that. But if you are banging on their door and asking questions and writing difficult letters and raising difficult questions in council chambers, they are going to have to start responding to that, because it is a political issue. And I don't think you can compete with the developers on an even playing field. So they need to start. It needs to be done through that route, I believe. Otherwise, you know, it's too difficult. I mean, look, 5 years. I mean, you are incredibly, you know, dog. I bet you're brilliant with a bad knitting ball of wool. Just give it to you and you'll pick it all apart. You know, but most people can't spend 5 years.
Yeah, no, just off the back of that, I think that's exactly right. And that's why part of what Russ is, we're a community land trust. So you can become a member for as little as £1. You become a shareholder. Shareholders are members, members are shareholders. You have to buy a minimum of 1 share. And you get a vote and a full say, eligible to be on the board. That's how it works. We've got like 350 members. We've been aiming to get to 1,000 hopefully soon. So if anyone wants to join, just join. And just kind of off the back of that, we're involved with a group called London Citizens, who kind of work. They're called Citizens UK. They work across the country, but they've got quite a lot of activity in London. They basically organise local groups for any action. It's not necessarily housing. It can be to do with schools, immigration, anything that's affecting local people. I say immigration, I mean in terms of helping refugees who are in trouble and stuff like that. That came out wrong. What I'm trying to say, in April, they do campaigns with the mayoral election, and basically they've set out their manifesto for this mayoral election, and it's basically entirely to do with housing, because as you know, the housing situation in London is the #1 issue going into this election for the next mayor. And they are doing a big push, a big drive. I'm trying to remember, one of their asks is for more community land trusts, rent controls, landlord kind of task force to find rogue landlords, things like that. And if you do want to get involved in that campaigning side of things, please join us, join London Citizens, and help us when we go to the Copper Box in April to put Sadiq Khan and Zach Goldsmith on the spot. So yeah, I think that stuff is really, really, really important.
Slightly banal question to offer you and Alice. What's it like living in a sort of slight tourist attraction then? Do you get people, Alice, I mean, we're all coming actually next Wednesday on a tour, so I can't apologise for that. What's it like living somewhere that has become rather famous for?
Well, it's fine. I guess we're kind of used to it. I believe that people have been coming to visit Walter's Way ever since it was built. I think the people who built it did an open house in 1987 and have been sort of welcoming people who are interested in architecture ever since. I think it's good that people are interested in this good design, which is quite unusual. And I think it is based on Walter's clever design. It's unusually for London, it does really feel like a bit of a community, and I think that's the orientation of the houses. Segal's design philosophy, the fact that the houses all look onto the central bit of road in the middle. They all each have their own garden. It seems to create community the children all hang out together and adults are often sort of congregating outside, which I think is quite unusual. It's sort of quite a slight sort of Mediterranean feel, which I always think maybe goes back to Walter's sort of time that he spent in when he was an architect in Mallorca, or maybe back to his kind of childhood in Switzerland. He seems to have sort of created something that is really quite unusual for London. So I think it's good for people to see it, especially people who might then be designing houses.
Great. Well, I can't wait for a heat wave next Wednesday when we visit. Are there any last questions before we... Oh, there's a few hands there. Yes, sir.
It's not a question. It is a clarification of a previous point, which was about leadership and how do you control something but give ultimate freedom to the design. I was a close friend of Walter's, and we discussed over many years every point that has been raised this evening. But there's one point I can make to clarify something. He said to me that Stravinsky, in one of his letters, has said that I chose the parameters but gave myself total freedom within those parameters. Now, with Walter, his parameters, which he stuck to, was the system. And within the system, he gave his clients total freedom.
That's a very nice.
So that's a form of philosophy and leadership, which is one of his absolute many characteristics. But if you talked about land, leadership, joints, everything had a philosophy which came about through many, many years of thinking, drawing. It didn't come quickly.
Thank you.
That would be a beautiful point to end on, but I think there are actually a couple of questions. I do apologise. Sorry, the gentleman here.
Mine follows very nicely on that, because
Great.
one of the great creative things that I think Walter did that excited us when we were students in the 70s was the Tartan grid, which was, underlied the design of the Highgate House and the early houses. And I just wanted to ask the panel, in the light of what Charlie said about the cutting and the collision and self-build and passive house, is there anything left of the Tartan grid now?
John laughed knowingly, so maybe you can answer that one.
I mean, this is a chapter in the ongoing question of when does the need for, current building performance and so on negate the original simplicity and economy of what Walter devised. And it's a debate which has no answer, I think, but I do think, that we are fast approaching a position where it becomes more and more difficult to just get out there and start, sawing up wood and sticking it together and building a house, the regulations and all the rest of it. And so in that context, the Tartan grid sort of becomes less and less important, really, I think.
What is the Tartan grid? Sorry to ask. I have no idea.
Okay, so it's...
I'm glad you asked.
Good question.
Yeah, I'm making a gross assumption. Yeah, I mean, what Walter did was took the basic sizes that materials are available on, 2 feet, and then a structural thickness of, let's say, 2 inches, which was a wood wall slab, it was a joist, it was the whole kind of kit of parts was assembled around these basic sizes, and the 2 foot 2 inch grid in both directions accommodated the structure, the infill and everything else. And it's a modular arrangement. And what it meant was that you could talk to people who are not used to reading plans. Rooms are 3 modules that way and 4 modules that way, and you could picture what it was like, and you could stand there in a building without any walls in it, and you could start measuring out the sizes of rooms without having the facility necessary to read drawings and so on. You could visualise the spaces. You could position windows and doors according to 3 that way and 2 that way, and you could picture how it would work. And that is a very intrinsic facility, I think, which does very often get lost when you start getting greater complexity and higher performance out of the method.
I think that's the rub. These are great, but as soon as you get into modern construction, the thickness of the walls, the module starts to break down on the thickness of the. I mean, it's complicated. It's difficult. And I think there are ways you can build simply, but I'm not sure. That module grid kind of stacks up still.
But there are so many other aspects. I mean, the idea of dry construction, the idea of building buildings above the ground, the idea of having simple joints which are holding the whole thing together. I mean, there's a whole load of other stuff which still works, and it means that you can build buildings much quicker, cheaper and more easily than in other ways, using sort of steel, concrete, brick and plaster and so on. So there's an awful lot of stuff that comes straight out of a common sense approach to how you put buildings together, which you can recreate in a different way, using a different material. Walter was always interested in looking at alternative materials. I mentioned steel, but I mean, he was always very inquisitive about other ways of doing things.
But it's that humanity, isn't it, that underlies it, the humanity of the build process that kind of strikes me the real chord.
Well, I mean, that was another aspect of his practice, I mean, he was a charming, totally obstinate character, which meant that he could sweet talk people, and he could be totally obdurate when it came to making sure that these principles were carried through. Bureaucrats were dumbfounded. They didn't know how to deal with this, I mean, they'd never come across it.
I'd love to say something about his character, which, he was extremely naughty.
Did you catch that at the back? He was extremely naughty. I'm repeating you a bit louder.
Well, he was a pilot, and the planning officers and surveyors and inspectors, he would get his own way in the end. He was an extremely difficult person to deal with. I bought his last brick house that he built, and I lived in it for 20 years. That's one of the Taskalo terraces. And the negotiation to buy the house from him and his wife, they were the developers. It took ages. And well, his son is here, so I can't. I can't tell you the many naughty things he did. For instance.
And he sold those houses far too cheaply. At the time.
That might be one that you need to discuss after. Maybe I'll umpire that.
I paid 10,000.
No more.
It's on the market at the moment for $1.25 million. It's not my house anymore.
I think we've got time for one quick question, actually. Then I'm going to actually say that there will be drinks afterwards, so there will be an opportunity to ask our Yes, and hear about how Walter was naughty. Sorry, last hand at the back there.
Sorry, my question might have been earlier on, but it was basically about developers and how they kind of build speculatively, and with kind of cooperative building or self-builds, there is already a kind of a client who wants to live there, whereas with developed housing, there isn't necessarily people who want to live there. There are a lot of developed buildings which lie empty because they can't find anyone who wants to live there.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, that is a problem of the developer having such such a strong presence in the way that housing comes together in this country. I mean, it goes back to what Charlie was saying about the sort of lack of self-build, the number of self-build housing here. I'm not quite sure that was a question, so I'm struggling slightly to know who to direct it at.
I don't know. I just feel like the bigger issue is it's the kind of indirectness of the process, and it's not just developers are these kind of baddies. It's a culture that, as Charlie mentioned, kind of goes back a really long way. But if you think about like private rented houses, like think about a new build private rented house. So like, so the developer has built it and they kind of need to make money. The builders built it as well. They need to make money. And then somebody buys it who probably has another mortgage to pay. And then they've got a mortgage to buy this new house. And then they're renting it to somebody. And that needs to pay for, all of those kind of people going back up the chain. And, every time... I also forgot to mention that the developers borrowed the money as well, so the bank needs to be paid back as well. And so this, I don't know, what we're talking about, I suppose, is like more of a direct approach, I think. And I think it is important, and in different countries it works in, it works in that way, or in a more direct way.
Yeah. There are other models abroad, actually. I know of one in Argentina called Fide Comiso, where people can get together and actually work with the architect to fund a project that they then live in. And you just fund, sorry?
Baugroup in Germany, Baugroup.
Right, okay,
Group
yeah,
build.
so you just fund the stage you're at, actually, and it keeps sort of growing as you build. So there are other models.
But you're right that like people don't get a choice. So like, the developer is building the house, and they're not going to live in it, and neither's the person who's going to buy it. So the person who's buy it doesn't even care. Like you get these, like bedrooms with no windows in them and things like that. Because, I mean, I've heard of it.
But yeah.
Might be apocryphal. I know.
It's good though.
I also questioned it as well. Maybe there's borrowed light through a door. I don't know. But it's, it's not ultimately like it's for people to live in, isn't it? And that's what it should be about.
Well, I think on that note, I'm going to recommend everyone looks up Ross, pays their membership fee, becomes a part of, if not that community trust, then another one. I'd like to give a massive thank you to our panel of experts tonight, Alice Grahame, Jon Broome, Charlie Luxton, Schulz and Kareem Dayes. Also probably to a lot of other people in the room that need bigging up. Thanks massively obviously to Walter Seagal. And Kareem's dad, Dave Dayes, is here. He was one of the original self-builders. I'm sure he's happy to...
And Jeff's there. He asked a difficult question.
Jeff asked a difficult question. There are drinks afterwards, which they're going to be served in that room there. For some reason, it's the South Jury Room. I guess it's on the South that we do juries in it, but there will be drinks there. So I'd like to say a massive thank you to all of you, actually, for a great evening. A massive thank you also to Walter Seagull.